I learned something early in my life that changed everything for me. The moment I stopped negotiating with my excuses, my life began to move in a completely different direction. I realized that there are really two versions of every person: the disciplined, focused, unstoppable version, and the weak version that hesitates, delays, and makes promises it never keeps. And the quality of your life is determined by which one you allow to lead. Let me ask you something very direct, and I want you to be honest with yourself right now. What is the one habit, fear, or excuse that is keeping you stuck in the weakest version of yourself today? Write it in the comments below, because the moment you name it, you begin to take away its power over you. I want you to understand something important from the very beginning. Success is not a mystery, and it is not reserved for a special group of people. In my experience working with thousands of high achievers, I discovered that success is predictable. It is the result of doing the right things consistently, even when you don't feel like it. The weak version of yourself waits for motivation. The strong version creates discipline and acts anyway. When I talk about killing the weak version of yourself, I am not speaking metaphorically for entertainment. I am talking about a mental shift. It is the decision to stop identifying with the part of you that procrastinates, doubts, and avoids discomfort. Because every time you give in to that part of yourself, you reinforce it. And every time you choose discipline instead, you weaken it. I learned this principle the hard way in my early life. There were years when I struggled, when I had no direction, and when I blamed circumstances for my lack of progress. But eventually, I realized something that changed my trajectory forever. My life was not controlled by the economy, my background, or other people. It was controlled by my daily choices. And those choices were either building my success or destroying it. Most people underestimate the power of small decisions. They think it is the big moments that define their lives, but in reality, it is the small repeated actions that shape everything. The decision to wake up early or hit snooze. The decision to focus or get distracted. The decision to follow through or quit halfway. These are the moments where the weak version of you either grows stronger or starts to disappear. I want you to think about your goals right now. Maybe you want financial independence, better health, a stronger mindset, or more confidence. Whatever it is, I can tell you with certainty that your goals are not blocked by lack of ability. They are blocked by inconsistency. And inconsistency is always the result of allowing the weak version of yourself to make decisions for you in critical moments. One of the most powerful discoveries I ever made is this: motivation is temporary, but habits are permanent. If you rely on motivation, you will always struggle. But if you build habits, you will eventually reach a point where success becomes automatic. The weak version of yourself resists habits because habits require effort in the beginning. The strong version understands that discomfort is the price of transformation. So the question is not whether you are capable of success. The question is whether you are willing to endure the short-term discomfort required to create a better life. Every successful person I have ever studied has mastered this principle. They do what is hard now so their life becomes easier later. The weak version does what is easy now and pays for it later in frustration, regret, and missed opportunities. I want you to imagine something with me for a moment. Imagine two futures. In one future, you continue listening to the weak version of yourself. You delay important tasks, you avoid difficult conversations, you give up when things get hard. In the other future, you decide today that things are going to change. You begin. Acting with discipline, you follow through on your commitments, and you build momentum one day at a time. These two futures are created by the same person, but they lead to completely different lives. The truth is, nobody is coming to save you. No perfect opportunity is going to arrive and suddenly fix everything. Your life changes the moment you decide that your standards are no longer negotiable. And standards are what separate high performers from everyone else. When you raise your standards, you automatically eliminate behaviors that are not aligned with your goals. I always tell people that self-discipline is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. At first, it feels difficult to say no to distractions or temptations. But over time, it becomes easier, and eventually it becomes your natural way of living. That is the moment when the weak version of you no longer has control. If you are watching this right now, I want you to pause and reflect. Are your daily actions aligned with the life you say you want? Or are you repeatedly choosing comfort over growth? Because every time you choose comfort in the wrong moment, you are training yourself to stay the same. And staying the same is the fastest way to fall behind in a world that is constantly moving forward. I want you to commit to something right now, even if it is small. Decide on one action you have been avoiding and take responsibility for completing it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because transformation does not begin with massive change. It begins with a single decision to stop tolerating your own excuses. And as we continue, I am going to show you exactly how to build unstoppable discipline, how to reprogram your thinking, and how to permanently eliminate the weak version of yourself so that you can operate at your highest level every single day. If you are still here with me, it tells me something important about you. It tells me that part of you is already tired of the cycle of starting and stopping, of wanting more but not following through consistently. And I want you to understand that this awareness alone is powerful, because most people never even reach this point of honesty with themselves. Now let me go deeper with you. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that they try to add success on top of a weak foundation. They try to set big goals while still allowing procrastination, distraction, and emotional decision-making to run their daily life. But I have learned this: you cannot build a strong life on a weak pattern of behavior. So when I say kill the weak version of yourself, what I really mean is that you must stop giving authority to behaviors that sabotage your future. You must stop letting temporary emotions override long-term goals. Because every time you say, "I don't feel like it," you are reinforcing the weakest version of yourself as the decision maker in your life. I want you to think about how often you negotiate with yourself. You set a goal, and then immediately your mind begins to offer alternatives. Maybe later, maybe tomorrow, not maybe when I feel more ready. But I have studied high achievers for decades, and I can tell you this with certainty: successful people do not negotiate with their commitments. They execute. And here is a truth that many people resist at first, but eventually recognize as accurate. Your life is not controlled by your goals, it is controlled by your standards. Your standards define what you will and will not tolerate from yourself. If your standard is "I finish what I start," then you will behave differently than someone whose standard is "I try when I feel like it." Let me ask you again, and I want you to really think about this. What standard are you currently living by? Not the one you talk about, not the one you wish you had, but the one that is reflected in your daily behavior. Because your results are always an honest reflection of your real standards, not your stated intentions. One of the most powerful turning points in my own life was when I stopped blaming external circumstances and started taking full responsibility for everything. That shift changed everything for me. Because once you accept full responsibility, you also gain full power. As long as you blame, you remain stuck. But the moment you take ownership, you regain control. Most people underestimate how much their environment influences their weak version of themselves. Distractions, negative conversations, lack of structure, and constant stimulation all make it easier to delay, avoid, and escape responsibility. That is why high performers are intentional about their environment. They design it to support discipline rather than sabotage it. I always tell people that focus is not something you hope for, it is something you create. You create it by removing distractions, by setting clear priorities, and by deciding in advance what matters most. Because if you do not decide what is important, everything will become important, and you will end up scattered, overwhelmed, and unproductive. Now I want you to visualize something very clearly. Imagine that every time you gave in to distraction, there was a visible cost. Imagine you could see exactly what each moment of procrastination was taking from your future. I believe if people could see that cost in real time, they would change immediately. But because the consequences are delayed, the weak version of yourself convinces you that it does not matter. And this is where discipline becomes the most valuable skill you can ever develop. Discipline is simply the ability to do what you know you should do, even when you do not feel like doing it. It is not about perfection, it is about direction. Every disciplined action, no matter how small, is a vote for the stronger version of yourself. I have always believed that momentum is everything. When you begin to act consistently, even in small ways, something begins to shift internally. You start to see yourself differently. You begin to trust yourself more. And that self-trust is the foundation of all lasting success. The weak version of you relies on emotional highs. It needs inspiration, motivation, or external pressure. But the strong version of you operates independently of emotion. It does what needs to be done regardless of mood. And this is a skill that can be developed by anyone who is willing to practice it consistently. Let me give you a practical way to start applying this immediately. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Start with the next right action. Not the biggest action, not the perfect action, just the next right action. Because once you begin moving, clarity increases. But when you stay still, confusion grows. I also want you to understand that failure is not the opposite of success. In my experience, failure is simply feedback. The only real failure is quitting on yourself repeatedly. The weak version of you interprets setbacks as reasons to stop. The strong version interprets them as reasons to adjust and continue. And here is something I want you to really take seriously. Every time you choose discipline, you are not just completing a task. You are reshaping your identity. You are literally becoming a different person through repetition. And over time, these small decisions accumulate into a completely transformed life. So as we move forward, I want you to begin observing your own behavior with honesty, not judgment. Notice when the weak version of you appears. Notice what triggers it. And most importantly, notice that you always have the ability to choose differently in that exact moment. Now we arrive at the most important part of this message, because everything I have shared with you so far only matters if you apply it. Knowledge alone does not change your life. Action does. And sustained action, repeated over time, is what permanently eliminates the weak version of yourself. I want you to understand something at a deeper level now. The weak version of you is not an enemy to fight. It is a pattern to replace. Every time you choose discipline, you are not battling yourself, you are retraining yourself. You are building a new identity through repetition, and identity is what ultimately determines your behavior. I have always believed that your self-image is the real control center of your life. You will never consistently act in a way that is inconsistent with the way you see yourself. So if you see yourself as someone who delays, hesitates, or struggles to follow through, your behavior will match that identity. But if you begin to see yourself as someone who executes, follows through, and stays consistent, your behavior will eventually align with that as well. Let me ask you something important right now. Who are you becoming through your daily actions? Not who you want to become someday. Not who you talk about becoming. But who you are becoming right now through repetition, through habits, through choices that no one else sees, but that shape everything you experience in life. One of the most powerful decisions I ever made was to stop lowering my expectations of myself. I realized that every time I made an excuse, I was not just avoiding discomfort, I was lowering my standards. And over time, those lowered standards became my default behavior. So I made a decision to raise my standards and refuse to negotiate with them. I want you to think about your own standards again. If your standards are truly high, your behavior must reflect them consistently. Not occasionally, not when it is convenient, consistently. Because consistency is what turns intention into reality. The truth is, most people already know what they need to do. The problem is not knowledge. The problem is execution. And execution requires you to silence the weak version of yourself in the moment when it tries to take control. That moment is where your entire future is decided. I have seen this pattern in every successful person I have studied. They are not necessarily more talented. They are not always more intelligent. But they are more consistent. They act when others hesitate. They persist when others quit. And they build momentum while others remain stuck in hesitation. Let me be very clear with you. There is no magical transformation moment coming in your future. There is only the accumulation of daily decisions. And if those decisions are driven by discipline, your life will reflect that. If they are driven by comfort and avoidance, your life will reflect that as well. So if you want to kill the weak version of yourself, here's what it truly requires. It requires awareness in the moment of choice. It requires the willingness to feel discomfort without escaping it. And it requires repetition until discipline becomes your default setting. And I want you to know something encouraging here. You do not need to change your entire life in one day. You only need to win the next decision, then the next, then the next. Because transformation is not a single event, it is a direction. I always remind myself and others that progress is built one disciplined action at a time. Not in bursts of motivation, but in steady, consistent effort. And every time you follow through when you do not feel like it, you strengthen your future self. Now, I want you to take everything from this message and bring it down to one simple commitment. Decide today that you will no longer allow excuses to make your decisions for you. Decide that action will come before emotion. Decide that discipline will be your default response. Because the moment you make that decision, something shifts internally. You stop being someone who hopes for change and start being someone who creates it. And that is the real difference between the weak version and the strongest version of yourself. If you apply this, your life will not just improve slightly. It will begin to transform in a way that you can. How actually feel in your confidence, your clarity, and your momentum. And it all starts with the next decision you make after this video ends.